the dumbest contract from each MLB team. Okay, before we start, few things we need to go over. First, the obvious, I'm not the voice you're used to hearing on this channel. And that's because Jake, who usually makes the videos here at MTC, couldn't make one this week, so he collabed with me, Peyton from Big League Analysis on TikTok and YouTube, to create the video you're currently watching. So hopefully, I'm able to fill those big shoes. And next, the contracts we'll be talking about today are more skewed towards recent MLB history and are more skewed towards bad use of funds rather than contracts that just didn't work out. For example, Albert Pujols' deal with the Angels and Miguel Cabrera's second contract with the Tigers were both bad, but they were both legends of the sport. You can kind of justify that. The ones we're going to talk about today, though, not as much. Also, we are looking at this through the lens of hindsight, so while I do try and give solid reasoning for each of my picks, I do have the luxury of already knowing how everything panned out. But regardless, we have a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. For organization's sake, I'm going to go by division, starting with the AL East. New York Yankees, Jacoby Ellsbury. At the end of 2013, the Yankees poached Ellsbury from the division rival Red Sox for 7 years and $153 million. While Ellsbury had an incredible 2011 campaign where he was the runner-up for the AL MVP award, his offensive production would decline in the 2 subsequent seasons. So when you consider that the main thing that made him consistently good was his speed and defense, you had to have been worried about the long-term outlook of this deal, as those are skills that don't typically age well. And that definitely was a part of the problem with his time in the Bronx, but this contract didn't turn into a total disaster until after the 2017 season. As with him dealing with a variety of medical issues, he'd never play another game in Major League Baseball. But that didn't mean the Yankees had to stop paying him, so because of this, he'd get paid his last $68 million of the contract without suiting up once. Boston Red Sox, Pablo Sandoval. This one kind of hurts, because how could you not love Pablo Sandoval? Well, I guess I get it if you're from Boston. In November 2014, the Kung Fu Panda signed for $90 million over 5 years with the Sox, a pairing that pretty much never worked after the first month. Because yeah, he did come out the gate hot, hitting .312 in his first month. However, he'd finished that season 25% worse than the average hitter, and he never really recovered. He struggled with weight and injury issues, which, coincidence or not, led to this all-time highlight of his belt breaking on a swing against the Blue Jays. Overall, Boston paid him a boatload of money to post a negative 1.6 WAR. And following the release of him midway through 2017, he'd go back to the Bay Area, where he'd post a few more productive seasons. Toronto Blue Jays, Kirby Yates. I will cut GM Ross Atkins some slack because he did acknowledge that this was risky, but the Jays gave Kirby Yates, who basically missed all of 2020 due to a bone spur procedure in his elbow, a 1-year deal worth $5.5 million in incentives, just for the reliever to undergo Tommy John before the campaign started, miss the entire season, and dip to Atlanta in free agency without ever throwing a pitch as a Blue Jay. Again, they did acknowledge that this was risky, but considering that Toronto just fell short of the playoffs that season, if they reallocated that $5.5 million they basically burned, they probably could have slipped in. Tampa Bay Rays, Grant Balfour. Historically, the Rays haven't given out a lot of big contracts. It's just how they work as an organization. But I chose Balfour because it was a weird situation. He originally signed with the O's, but that 2-year $15 million contract fell through because of a failed physical, prompting the Rays to scoop in and basically give him the same contract minus $1 million. In the first year of the deal though, in 2014, Balfour actually stayed healthy, but the results weren't pretty. Seeing an increase in walks, a decrease in strikeouts, and half the ERA plus from the prior season. He would not stay healthy the following year, however, with those 4 innings pitched in 2015 being his final in an MLB uniform. Baltimore Orioles, Chris Davis. This has been covered on the MTC channel before, and for good reason. It was a complete disaster. Davis signed a 7-year, $161 million extension with the O's in 2016, and over the course of that contract, he posted a negative 5.8 WAR. Although he deserved to get paid something, $161 million for a guy who already displayed inconsistency, had a good but not elite 132 OPS plus at a non-premier defensive position, while also having a worrying level of Ks, probably wasn't the best idea. And to make matters worse, he's owed $42 million in deferred payments from 2023 to 2037. Let's move to the AL Central. First, let's start with Cleveland.
prior to the 2013 season, the at the time Indians handed Michael Bourne a 4-year, $48 million contract. And they did this despite the fact that the 30-year-old's production on the bases, a huge part of his game, started to decrease in his final year in Atlanta. And he was never really able to recapture the wheels, as most people aren't able to do. Seeing a sharp decrease in his production after a solid opening campaign, and overall only posting 3.1 WAR for the Cleveland Indians. Minnesota Twins, Ricky Nolasco. The Joe Mauer deal ended up being bad, but come on, it was Joe Mauer, he had a track record. But Ricky Nolasco didn't, so giving him 4 years and $49 million entering 2014 when his best ERA plus since 2009 was 101 was a bit suspect. And believe it or not, he'd post an ERA over 5 in the Twin Cities, which ended up being 20% below average, while also seeing a decrease in his innings pitched, something that was kind of a calling card for Nolasco. The Twins kind of ended up being the victims here, as their almost $50 million investment that turned into a -3 WAR over 3 seasons may be a result of the weird $52 million contract the Cubs gave a similar-ish pitcher Edwin Jackson. Detroit Tigers, Jordan Zimmermann. While Zimmermann was fine in his final year in Washington, the cracks were starting to show. His strikeouts were down, his numbers overall were down, and his velo was decreasing. But despite the red flags for a pitcher who was turning 30, this didn't stop Detroit from giving the right-hander 5 years and $110 million. And the decline accelerated once he stepped foot in Comerica, posting an 80 ERA plus over the course of the deal, while becoming one of the most hittable guys in the league and dealing with a litany of injuries. So the Tigers gave Zimmermann $110 million just to get 2 wins above replacement in return. Kansas City Royals, Ian Kennedy. After losing pieces of a rotation that helped them win a World Series, Kansas City splurged with 5 years and $70 million for Ian Kennedy, a guy who was below average at preventing runs since a top 4 Cy Young finish all the way back in 2011. For context, this offseason was full with a bunch of underwhelming pitching contracts, so that was just the nature of the market at the time. But at first, it didn't seem that bad, as in his first year in KC, he posted his best season since his Arizona days. But that didn't last, and by 2019, he was coming out of the bullpen, and while he was solid there, he was still being paid like he was starting 32 games a year. Overall, it wasn't as bad as the others, posting a 6.7 WAR for $70 million. However, it was still head-scratching. White Sox, John Jay. While Yoan Moncada's deal is more detrimental to the White Sox franchise, I wanted to focus on this one because it's kind of funny. In 2019, the White Sox wanted Manny Machado, so their idea for a pitch, since they already had Yonder Alonso, the brother of Manny Machado's wife, was to give $4 million to a past his prime John Jay, one of Manny's great friends. But instead, as you know, Machado went to San Diego, and Jay virtually did nothing across 49 games on the South Side, having a -0.7 WAR and an OPS plus way below league average. So once again, those darn Padres screwed the Chi Sox. Moving on to the AL West, Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, Anthony Rendon. This one's a doozy. Rendon, after being one of the best third basemen in baseball for a few seasons and a huge contributor on a World Series team, seemingly gave up following inking a 7-year, $245 million deal in Anaheim. Following a successful shortened 2020 season, when Rendon's been on the field, which is rare by the way, his production's been mediocre. And not only that, it's been filled with drama. He tried fighting a fan after a game, he pretended like he didn't speak English to media members, and he's been accused of milking injuries. But regardless, he's going to be owed almost $40 million each year until he's 36 years old. You see, the batted ball data hasn't fallen off a cliff, so there is a reality where Rendon plays 120 games and is a productive bet. But to be honest, I don't even think Rendon wants that. Like, we're talking about a guy who went on record saying that he doesn't like baseball, so I'm not surprised he checked out once he got paid. Houston Astros, John Singleton. I applaud what Houston tried here. They gave a climbing prospect a nice 5-year, $10 million deal that could climb all the way up to $35 million if he made the big league roster. However, they gave this deal to a guy who already failed 2 wellness tests for a certain plant. Now, the fact that you could get suspended for that not so long ago is definitely stupid, but it was a rule. And unsurprisingly, after not finding big league success, he failed another test. In the end, he was able to rake in around $2 million a year from 2014 to 2018, despite the fact his last big league appearance came in 2015. Which actually remained true up until 2023, where his long road finally led him back to the big leagues, and he actually was able to take an at-bat for Houston in the ALCS, so it was a pretty cool story. Oakland A's, Billy Butler. The typically cheap A's decided to randomly splurge on Billy Butler back in 2014, giving him 3 years and $30 million, despite the fact the former All-Star was already in decline and coming off a negative WAR season for the Kansas City Royals. But another thing that makes this worse is this is one of the last deals they made before the disastrous trade of Josh Donaldson. So not off to a good start, and once he hit the field, things didn't get better, as he pretty much did the same thing as his prior season, league average hitting with no real power or defensive value and a negative WAR. And to top it all off, he was bad for the locker room, as Butler allegedly costed his teammate Danny Valencia an endorsement deal by running his mouth, which led to an altercation that the Oakland locker room sided with Valencia on. Butler was released soon after. Seattle Mariners, Tommy La Stella. This one just annoys me because not only did the Mariners make their first postseason in 2 decades in 2022, they were the most profitable team in the game according to Forbes. So you'd expect them to try and be a bit more aggressive in the offseason, right? Well, outside of a solid move for Teoscar Hernandez, they decided that instead of one more medium-sized move to get them over the top, they'd cheap out instead and go with Tommy La Stella to finish the offense. And in return, La Stella basically did nothing in his lone 12 games for the M's, in a season where Seattle would fall just short of the postseason. So maybe if the organization was a bit less greedy, perhaps they could have made the extra move available to eke out a few more wins and return to October. But hey, I guess the bottom line is more important. Texas Rangers, Chan-Ho Park. A bit of a throwback here, but the Rangers gave the former Dodgers pitcher 5 years and $65 million to post an ERA north of 5 and a WAR slightly above 1. This was kind of just the issue with the Rangers of that era, as they signed the big fish in Alex Rodriguez in 01 and then realized they needed more than just one player. This sparked a lot of bad/weird deals to try and fill in the gaps, including but not limited to Ken Caminiti, John Rocker, a 40-year-old Andres Galarraga, and Ton Van Poppel. But Chan-Ho Park is probably the most infamous example of this. It's National League time, and we're starting in the East. New York Mets, Jed Lowrie. The Mets have had a few famous bad deals, but I wanted to shed some light on the time where former agent Brody Van Wagen took over operations and started paying all of his old clients. And one of these examples was a 35-year-old Jed Lowrie, who was coming off an all-star season for the A's and got 2 years and $20 million. But after signing him, Lowrie developed a really painful knee issue in the spring of 2019. And the Mets allegedly refused to let him get surgery on it and threatened to file a grievance against Lowrie if he did so. This resulted in Lowrie getting paid $20 million to just have 7 at-bats in Queens. And following 2020, he'd bounce and go back to Oakland, where he actually put up one final solid campaign. Washington Nationals, Steven Strasburg. Steven Strasburg deserved the contract he got. The Nationals don't win the title without him, that's a fact. However, the issue here is the fact that Washington opted to not get disability insurance on a 7-year, $245 million deal because the premiums were too high. Considering his age and injury history, this was a short-sighted cheap move, and now the Nationals are literally paying for it dearly, as Stras has been paid $105 million for 31 innings. Atlanta Braves, BJ Upton. In 2012, Atlanta signed Upton to a 5-year, $75 million deal, and he'd only spend 2 years there, posting a negative WAR while earning $25 million. Luckily, Atlanta was able to dump him to San Diego along with Craig Kimbrell to avoid the situation potentially getting worse. But the thing is, this was kind of a miss from the jump. BJ was solid, but nothing incredible, averaging a 2.5 WAR per 650 plate appearances, being a no doubt great athlete with a solid power speed combo, but not having great defense or anything that led to real accolades. So throwing him that level of money to just pair him with his brother Justin was a bad move. Miami Marlins, Avisaíl Garcia. The Marlins rarely ever make free agent splashes, especially recently, but randomly they decided to give 4 years and $53 million to Avisaíl Garcia. The outfielder, who is coming off of a solid 121 OPS plus season before signing the deal, has been virtually unplayable as a member of the Fish, hitting to a 215 average and an OPS plus of just 68 in 135 games. Prior to signing the deal, he had been very inconsistent year to year, and while he's just been consistently bad as a member of the Marlins, he still has some time to figure it out. Philadelphia Phillies, Ryan Howard. Phillies signed Ryan Howard to a 5-year, $125 million extension 2 years before his current contract expired. You may be seeing where you might run into issues, especially since we're dealing with a 6'4", 250-pound 30-year-old first baseman. But we were actually so close to this not becoming a reality, well, at least before the contract kicked in. Because in literally the last play of the 2011 season, Ryan Howard tore his Achilles tendon. This helped accelerate his inevitable decline, resulting in him posting a negative 4.8 WAR and a below average OPS plus over the span of the extension. Moving over to the NL Central, let's start with the Chicago Cubs, where I chose Jason Hayward. Prior to signing his massive 8-year, $184 million contract with the Cubs, Jason Hayward was definitely a great baseball player. I mean, hey, he posted a 6.9 WAR just the year before. However, his bat was never really elite, so once that facet of his game declined, it became very hard to justify the amount of money they were paying him. And that decrease in production happened the moment he stepped foot in the friendly confines, posting a 68 OPS plus in the regular season. And while the Cubs did end up winning their first World Series in over a century that year, Hayward hit just 104 in the postseason. And it never really got better, as they paid him all of that money just for him to never really find long-term success with the bat again and only post a WAR of 9. Pittsburgh Pirates, Daniel Hudson. This is another team that's being cheap, but for some reason back in 2017, they decided to hand Daniel Hudson, who was coming off a pretty rough 5-year stretch, 2 years and $11 million to relieve games for them. Not the worst contract in the world, but it was definitely an overpay, considering he continued to be mediocre, being roughly league average and then traded after the season. Cincinnati Reds, Homer Bailey. Homer Bailey was the Reds' homegrown pitching star, and the 2 years prior to his extension, he pitched to a mid-3s ERA, pitched 200 innings both years, and had 2 different no-hitters. However, to give him a 6-year, $105 million deal off of that was a bit much to say the least, considering he didn't have a great track record before 2012, and even in those 2 good seasons, his run-preventing abilities were only slightly above league average. And while he ended up being solid in his first year of the deal, his next 4, he combined for an ERA above 6 and some injury-filled seasons, meaning he was paid $77 million to post a negative 1.3 WAR. St. Louis Cardinals, Dexter Fowler. Following a championship with the Cubs, the Cardinals decided to give Dexter Fowler 5 years and $82 million. While Fowler was solid and continued to be solid in his first year in St. Louis, this unfortunately always had overpay written all over it. Prior to 2016, this guy's best WAR in a season was 2.6. Not really the guy you'd want to give almost $100 million to. Which became apparent in the next couple years of the contract, as Dex posted a WAR of 0.1 while being paid $50 million. Going into 2021, he was shipped to Anaheim, where sadly, just 7 games into his stint with his new team, he tore his ACL, which effectively ended his MLB career. Milwaukee Brewers, Jeffrey Hammonds. This is another old one, but it's also maybe the biggest example of the Coors Field effect. Hammonds was an average hitter through the first 7 years of his career, but in the year 2000, his only year with the Rockies, he batted an insane .335, which inspired enough confidence in the Brewers to hand him a 3-year, $21.75 million deal. But in his first year for the Brew Crew, his batting average almost dipped 100 entire points, and his hitting production never returned, meaning by the time the Brewers paid him his contract in full, he gave them a negative overall WAR in return. Moving to the West, starting with the San Diego Padres, Eric Hosmer. San Diego gave 8 years and $144 million to a guy who was a good but not elite hitter, especially for his position. And while he did have a reputation for being a good defender, this is first base we're talking about. You don't really break the bank for that fielding wise. So unsurprisingly, this contract turned into a simple overpay, as Hosmer was an average hitter in his time at Petco Park, and his defense declined, meaning he was paid over $100 million by San Diego so far, because they still owe him money, to post just a 3.7 WAR. Colorado Rockies, Ian Desmond. Almost every Rockies deal recently has aged like milk, whether it's their attempt to build a Super Bowl pen, signing Arenado for $260 million just to trade him for a bag of chips, or their countless attempts at signing guys hoping Coors Field can rejuvenate them. However, Ian Desmond may have at least been the weirdest attempt so far, as they signed the shortstop / outfielder for 5 years and $70 million to play first base? A position he never played in the big leagues before? A pretty weird move considering his bat was good for a middle infielder, but not as good as it once was, being below average overall his past 2 seasons. So this is just a puzzling move, and unsurprisingly, he struggled with the bat, posting an 82 OPS plus as a Rocky, and struggled at the position he never played before. Shocker. Overall, he had a negative 2.5 WAR for the Rocks. Arizona Diamondbacks, Madison Bumgarner. The postseason legend showed signs of decline in his final year in San Fran, posting his highest ERA to this point, with even worse expected numbers and noticeable jumps in his quality of contact against. But despite that, division rival Arizona still gave him 5 years and $85 million to bolster their rotation, in a move that never really worked, as he had an ERA above 5 and a negative WAR in 4 seasons before getting DFA'd early in 2023, making him absent for the D-backs' weird World Series run. San Francisco Giants, Barry Zito. Going into 2007, Zito was 4 years removed from the last time he posted an ERA plus 20% better than the average pitcher. But despite that, they still gave him 7 years and $126 million. This was a disaster from the start, as he never posted an ERA below 4 in his time in the Bay Area and only had an above average ERA plus once. But a silver lining to this is the fact that he did have a little hot streak during the Giants' 2012 World Series run. So while the contract as a whole was terrible, at least he did contribute to at least one of their championships.
Los Angeles Dodgers, Scott Kazmir. Going into 2016, the Dodgers gave Kazmir a pitcher with one of the more extensive injury histories you're going to see, 3 years and $48 million. And in return, Kazmir only ended up pitching a single season for the Dodgers, where he posted an ERA plus of 88 in 136 innings. Kazmir never pitched again in LA following the season, so he was given $48 million to post a WAR of 0.1. To be fair to LA, he was coming off of back-to-back healthy seasons, but in both of those years, he faded hard down the stretch. So considering the injury history and his inability to get through a full season unscathed, that's why I chose it for the team, although I doubt it really affected them financially. So that was the list of the dumbest contract each MLB team has given out. Comment some of the ones I missed, and if you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more baseball content like this. Have a great day.